It wasn't that long ago when the Disney parks were basically king of the world, were making tons of money. People, for the most part, there's always complaints, but for the most part, people were happy. They felt like they got a lot of value out of their trips. But ever since 2020, a lot of changes have happened in a very short amount of time, including price hikes, and a lot of things that used to be included in free are now being charged for and being increasingly more expensive as time has gone on since they started charging for those things. And a lot of mainstream outlets now have openly been talking about this. We've also seen investors downgrade the Disney stock based on the weakness they see in the theme parks and competition coming up from Universal Studios with Epic Universe. We have a video here from CNBC that is asking how Disney vacations became too expensive for many Americans. So I figured let's watch through this video and get some thoughts on it, because I'm very curious as some of the things I have to say here, because I actually have not watched this yet. I know this video is out there, so I figured just watch through this live and give some thoughts together on this. So that's what we're going to do. So hi, I'm Jared with Capture the Magic, and we'll just get right into this.
Disney World and Disneyland, the quintessential American vacation.
There is something about the energy in a Disney park at dusk that is, I hate to use the word magical, but there's something about it.
A place where
I will agree. I mean, the Disney parks and really theme parks at night, I feel like take on a different light.
magic comes to life, where childhood memories are made.
A trip to Disney for parents and for little kids is really a rite of passage in this country, practically.
From the early days of Frontierland and Pirates of the Caribbean to modern-day editions like Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, the Disney parks have brought in guests from far and wide. I mean, who can forget their first step onto Main Street, USA? The castle, the characters, the food, the balloons, I'm sorry, this balloon cost how much?
Last I checked, it was $16 or $18. It may be more now. It's been a few years since we bought one of those, but yeah, for a balloon.
What's happening now is Disney is an incredibly expensive and incredibly magical experience.
Disney's park prices are up more on average than in a normal year. A one-day base level ticket to Disney World was averaged $89 in 2012 and averaged $147 in 2022.
Looking at that chart, I mean, we've talked about this before on this channel and other videos, but when you do take a look at that chart and you just see the price increases, it's the boiling frog that I've talked about before, where, if you went from $89 up to $154 in 1 year, that would cause a very different outcry, and they probably see a very drastic drop in attendance. But it's these small increases over time where you look at over a 10-year span and you're like, oh, wow, it's got to wait. That's the way it is, because if they turn up too quick, people jump off, and that's essentially what they've been doing, especially the past 10 years.
And that the growth rate of that cost has been about 5% annually.
But in its Q3 2024 results, Disney reported disappointing park numbers, with operating profits dropping 3% year over year, a concerning trend from one of the company's biggest moneymakers, and another blow to a stock that's down more than 15% in 6 months.
So the Disney stock also, it's been underperforming for years. If you look at I don't have the chart on me on this video, but if you look at the S&P, which is basically the average for the stock market, it's vastly underperformed the S&P 500 and has not been a very good return on your investment, especially if you bought it in the past 5 years. I think at the peak of it was around $160 some, maybe during COVID, because of the Disney Plus boom and things like that, and is now still sitting under $100 a share.
The price hikes at parks was enormous over the last few years. Same for some of the food, just every time they could, they would either make packages smaller, higher price, whatever.
And we talked about before, Disney's food prices are more than double the rate of inflation. So
that consumers just pushing back on that.
Disney blamed the slip in performance on a softening consumer environment, saying demand isn't where they thought it would be, an issue it said could linger for several quarters. Meaning Disney parks are not immune to what is becoming an industry-wide issue. Universal's parent company, Comcast, saw a nearly 11% drop in theme park revenue, driven by lower attendance in that same quarter.
Certainly there are going to be questions about the health of the consumer and whether the company got ahead of itself in its pricing.
You think? I mean, Disney openly talked about, well, I shouldn't say openly talked about, they openly displayed the behavior of really wanting to go after those high-end customers. And my argument has been for the longest time, the Disney parks were built by the middle class. It was people like my wife's family, for instance, like her mom grew up in Disneyland, going to the Disney parks, then brought her family, and now, my wife, and introduced it to me and our kids. So it's something that's what a lot of people did, is they passed that down, and they would go repeatedly, because at the time, again, it wasn't ever cheap, but you did get a lot for your money. And essentially they've priced out the middle class now, going after these ultra wealthy people. And I think this is one of the issues that goes into the moderation of demand, as they say, which just means lesser demand. Now, when it comes to, Universal, they had a down quarter as well, completely fair to them. I am curious though, how, you have Epic Universe around the corner. How much is their down quarter or quarters due to people just waiting to go on trips? Because I had sort of guessed that we may see this happen to Universal going into 2025, as, if you're looking to take a really big trip, you may just wait and say, well, let's not spend this money now, especially during these tight economic times with inflation and everything. Let's just wait until the theme park is open, and then we're going to go on our trip. So, not to say that Universal hasn't also experienced, down quarter, which they obviously have. I feel like it could be a different situation with Universal compared to Disney, but there are some similarities there, because both of them are going to be somewhat, I wouldn't say victim, but they are going to be, dealing with the economic issues that are impacting a lot of people that would potentially be going on vacations.
Of the entrance to the Disneyland park, that was a quote from Walt that says, "To all who come to this happy place, welcome." And we focus our energy on the all.
But is it really? Or is a trip to Disney just getting too expensive for inflation-weary American families?
Parks is huge as an investor for Walt Disney Parks, because it's about 40% of their total revenue, but it's 2/3 or 65% of their total operating profit.
When it comes to Disney's profits, its park business plays a huge role. In Q3 2024, Disney's domestic parks brought in $5.8 billion, a 3% increase from the year prior. However, its operating income for the same period actually slid 6% year over year.
Everything post-COVID is going through the roof, because a lot of these physical venues closed for a year or two because of COVID, and now they have to make up. Also, a lot of increase.
I should just note, it may have happened regardless, but Bob Iger is one of the reasons that the Disney parks did close, because while he wasn't CEO at the time, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, said he called Bob Iger to say he was thinking about, or say he didn't want to close Disneyland because he didn't want to spark a panic. And Bob Iger told him that he thought he should shut them down. So it very well could have happened regardless, due to the, pressure and things going on during the COVID time. But Bob Iger is the one that essentially suggested and encouraged the Disney parks to be shut down. So we'll just put that out there. You can listen, I'm not going to sit here and talk about the whys or if he's justified in doing so, but I just want to point that out there. That is something that it was revealed. I think it was a New York Times article a couple weeks ago.
Increases in labor costs.
Given that linear television has been disappointing Disney and everybody else in that business for the last decade, it stands to reason that Disney might have responded to that by pricing at parks a little more aggressively in order to prop up its financial results.
Yes. I think that's exactly part of it happened. Yep, I agree.
While Disney acknowledged a slowing consumer environment as reasoning for a drop in demand, it also notes it saw an uptick in guest spending at the parks due to its higher prices.
Things like food or merchandise or upgraded park passes like Genie Plus, ways to skip lines. There are lots of ways Disney gets you to spend more even when traffic stagnates.
I mean, Disney came out and, through the data leak, that ever since Disney introduced Genie Plus, they've made almost $800 million in revenue since in that amount of time. So almost $1 billion just from Genie Plus / Lightning Lane now. So they made a lot more money off of charging for things that used to be free. And really, the Disney parks have been essentially bankrolling the rest of the company through a lot of the stuff, that the struggles with Disney Plus, and then with the movie side. This summer they had a pretty good summer, but they've had some struggles the last few years on the movie side as well.
Over the past 10 years, the average cost for a Disney World single park ticket has inflated more than 56%, well above the national rate of inflation. And that, of course, doesn't include the cost of food, merchandise, lightning lanes, hotels, and airfare.
At a glance, looking at how the Disney experience has evolved, it's gotten a lot more difficult for the average person to jump into.
This is Jake Williams. He's a YouTuber and travel blogger and set out this year to answer the same question. Has Disney gotten too expensive? So he went to Disney World and compared the price of a one-day trip in 2024 to that same trip in 2017.
So when we add everything up, the hotel, the park add-ons, all the food, the total cost for a single day at Disney for 2 adults came out to a jaw-dropping $886 USD. The exact same trip in 2017 would have cost a total of $567. That's almost a $320 difference between 2 trips. That's a 44% increase in just 7 years, far outpacing inflation, which is around 24% since 2017.
The park experience also feels more crowded and worse overall.
Well, they've also cut back on maintenance. So there are more rides that go down more frequently. So, I mean, 2018, 2019 park experience to going now, I think if those are your 2 times you went, you would have a very drastically different experience. And, and by the way, his YouTube channel, Bright Sun Travels, I think is what it was. It's a good channel. You should check it out.
Despite there being less people in the parks this year, we're back to a point where things should be returning to normal, but usually we don't see the consumer experience following that trend.
But while prices on everything from hotels and photo passes to Mickey ears and churros have been climbing, Disney Parks has kept its lowest ticket tier stable since 2019. At Walt Disney World, that's $109 for a single-day single-park ticket on off-peak days.
When you begin to think about, inflationary pressure and disposable income and some of those components that weigh on consumers, we hear that very clearly, and we react to that with, again, offers or ways for people to go from, well, I was going to come on a Thursday and the price is one number on a Thursday, or I could come on a Tuesday and the price is a different number. There's flexibility and options for our guests, and I think that's what they're now being more careful and thoughtful as they make their choices.
Also, it's a pretty common marketing tactic. Like, I come from the marketing space, digital marketing and things like that. Their base level ticket hasn't changed because they still want to be able to say starting at, it's like you can do this with anything. You say, oh, it's starting at $100, but most cases, if you're looking to go, it's going to end up being, 150, 160. Like, it's going to be more expensive, but technically they do offer that lower tier ticket you can get. It's just not all the time, as most of the time, they do surge level pricing, essentially kind of like what Uber and other places do, where if it's more popular date, if it's a holiday, typically it's going to be more expensive on those days versus like off peak time. Same thing with like hotels and such. So, I think on some level it could be still trying to offer value to people. And honestly too, it's getting people more to come to the off peak times, but it's also so they can say in their marketing, it's starting at $109 or whatever that base price ticket is.
Another frustration from Disney goers, over the past 10 years, the parks have been chipping away at previously free amenities. Things like the Fast Pass system, which was replaced in 2014 by Magic Bands, and then again by Genie Plus, and now Lightning Lanes, which now start at $30 per ticket per day. And those previously free Magic Bands given to resort guests are now only available to purchase. Even the free shuttle bus between the Orlando airport to Disney World resorts has been replaced with a private for-cost bus company.
When you look at all the stuff that they've been making a lot more expensive or just eliminating complimentary altogether, that to me seems anti-consumer.
Yep. I also think it's very short-sighted. So I think I've said this for a while. I think what Disney's been doing, it's almost like harvesting. They decided our parks are insanely popular. We're going to harvest all these profits now. We're going to start charging for things that we didn't charge before. We have this high demand. Like, we can do this. And they just started focusing on short-term profits because they just saw the money signs and they're like, let's go get it. In my opinion, it's sacrificing the long-term health and really satisfaction of your consumer. So in the short term, yeah, you can make a lot of money, and they have. But I think we're now starting to see those beginning stages of where people go, I don't think it's worth going back. And not to mention, there's competition with, Universal Studios and Epic Universe, and not only, other theme parks, you got regional theme parks, but you have cruise lines as well. So there's a lot of competition for vacation dollars where a lot of people, even though Disney, never was cheap, you did feel like you got a lot of value out of it. You got the free Magical Express, like they said, the Fast Pass Plus, the Magic Bands. A lot of these things made you feel like, wow, okay, I spent a lot of money, but it was worth it. It was a little extra. And the Disney cast members and the management used to go really out of their way on things, and those have been slipping as well.
There's no benefit to the consumer.
But what about guests that are going for more than one day? With Disney World's 4 parks and Disneyland's 2, guests often visit for days at a time, packaging park hoppers, lightning lanes, resort stays, and character dinners. The average cost of a 5-night Disney World vacation in 2024, with all the bells and whistles, comes to around $5,000. Comparatively, a high-end trip to Mexico cost around $6,000.
Disney has positioned a multi-day trip to Disney World as a form of upper middle class luxury travel and priced it accordingly.
The median annual income in the United States is $74,580, meaning a family of 4 bringing in an average salary would need to pay almost an entire month's income for a multi-day trip to Disney World.
It continues to be a premium experience that puts pressure on the more price-sensitive cohort of customers that want to go there and struggle with the cost.
Of course, Disney isn't the only theme park to raise prices. A one-day single park ticket at Universal Studios Orlando now ranges between $119
They're showing Universal Studios Hollywood there, but their point's not wrong.
to $179, an increase of up to $20 in just 1 year, keeping pace with Disney World's one-day ticket average of $147. And an average 3-day, 4-night trip for a family of 4 to Universal Orlando comes in at around $4,700, comparable to an even longer 5-night trip at Disney World.
So it depends on a lot of this stuff. Obviously, they're not going into details of how they got these numbers. It really depends on, there are both offer discounts, Disney and Universal. I do think, Universal is not any cheaper on a one-day ticket like they talked about. But again, they offer a lot of times discount packages. And again, I think a lot of the savings with Universal come in when you're in like annual pass holders. You get a lot more discounts, and your cost ends up going down there. But the Universal hotels are much more, especially their values, are much lower price. I mean, we just booked again for Halloween Horror Nights. We got a dockside, and we paid. It was just a regular studio. It wasn't a suite room, but I think it was like in the $80 to $90 range, maybe even less. Sometimes you can get it less than that. So I feel like there are still savings, maybe more pockets of saving at Universal at times than versus Disney, but both are expensive. I'm not, I never have made the argument that Universal is just this insane, like half-priced value to Disney. But, in terms of the one-day ticket prices, they tend to keep pace with Disney. When Disney raises their prices, they raise theirs as well. So they do bring up a very valid point that it's not like Universal is this discount place to go.
But while parks like Universal Studios Orlando see significantly less guests annually, it's also been able to stabilize its annual visitation post-pandemic, where Disney World in Orlando has yet to see its visitation fully recover.
Universal can rise above it because it rides on Disney's coattails. Disney parks are the primary driver of visitation to Orlando. And once people make the decision to visit, Universal is an attractive stop for a lot of them. And in that way, it's interesting to consider whether Universal would succeed without a Disney nearby. I think it's fair to say that attendance and prices would be lower, that the business wouldn't be as good if it weren't drafting off of the visitation driven by Disney.
So then that makes
valid point, and he's not wrong. Historically speaking, I think that's one of the things that Universal is trying to create with, say, Epic Universe, and the things that I think they'll continue to do in the parks is not just be the theme park that rides off the coattails of Disney, but creating their own demand. And I think that's, the first thing we're really seeing of that is Epic Universe. We've seen pockets of it again with the Wizarding World, as that's a very unique experience that Disney has yet to be able really to answer to. So his point is not wrong. He's correct on that. If you didn't have Disney World, prices would be lower. And a lot of people looked at saying, let's go to Disney for 4 days and let's go to Universal for 1 or 2. But what Universal is looking to do, and we'll have to wait and see if the strategy works as time goes on. But that flips where people go, let's go to Universal and then add on maybe a day at Magic Kingdom or Hollywood Studios or whatever the case may be. So there is a symbiotic relationship between the two on some level, even though they're, fierce enemies. Like, or some people say they're frenemies. I don't really think they're frenemies because Comcast has cost Disney a lot of money in terms of when they bought 20th Century Fox. The Comcast CEO, Brian Roberts, threw in a bid to buy 20th Century Fox that then forced Iger to up his bid up to $70 billion to do it, because I think originally they were going to buy it for like 30. Comcast came in like $50 billion. So I don't think it's more frenemies. I think they are fierce competitors in this space. But his point, again, is not wrong in how it has been. I guess we'll have to wait and see, going forward, if Universal is going to be successful in sort of flipping that in terms of more people coming for Universal specifically and not just throwing it on to a Disney vacation.
Begs the question, if it's gotten too expensive to go to Disney, how are people paying for this?
Debt.
The power of the Disney brand and their connection with so many American families is so strong that there's always going to be people who are willing to go into debt to go to one of these parks.
A recent survey of 2,000 people by LendingTree found 45% of parents with children under 18 who visited a Disney park took on debt to do so. If we broaden that out to all Disney goers, almost a quarter of all visitors take on some form of debt to visit the parks, a trend that's actually not exclusive to Disney parks. Another survey found 36% of U.S. travelers plan to take on debt for their summer trips this year.
There's so much pressure to a degree that parents put on themselves to make this happen. And there's also kind of the keeping up with the Joneses thing as well. It is expensive just to get in the park at Disney. Then you have hotels and airfare and on down the line.
Disney World or Disneyland, depending upon your location, is basically a tax on being a parent.
But
I've never heard it put that way, but I kind of like that guy. He's got some good points. That's an interesting way to look at that.
just how much debt are people taking on?
The average family with young kids is taking on a little less than $2,000 in debt. And all Disney goers who are taking on debt are taking on between $1,600 and $1,700.
Again, we had a video on this exact topic in this exact article, so I will link it above if you do want to check this out. So I won't really comment much through this because, again, this is stuff we've already talked about before on the channel.
For many park goers, the added debt is worth it. 59% of those who took on debt for Disney said they had no regrets, with a Disney trip falling into what some would consider good debt.
For a lot of people, the pandemic kind of changed their views on things, and they made them think of how fragile life can be. So if there's something that they want to do, whether it's going to Disney or starting a small business or anything in between, a lot of people are still saying, you know what, I'm just going to jump in. No better time than now.
And this brings...
No, I will say that mindset, I think there's a lot to that, not to get like esoteric on here or, really anything like that. But, you only get one life, and you have, when your kids are little, they're only little for a little amount of time. And I can tell you with our kids, like, they're getting huge, and it doesn't seem like that long ago that they were just babies. So, I don't think a lot of people, or at least in my opinion, is if you're going to spend things, money on things, spending them on experiences for memories that you will create and really family bonding. Like, I understand where people are coming from when they say that. It gets it now. Obviously, it gets into a lot of the, he's talking about the pressure of it and things like that. But in terms of this sentiment amongst people, especially some people after COVID, really feeling like, life is fragile. Like, we only have so much time. We need to do these things. Like, I understand that. And they talk about people not regretting it. I think it's for that reason of you probably won't remember a lot of the money that you spent years down the line. When you're talking about, remember the time we went to Disney or Universal or whatever the case may be. So, the consumer sentiment end of things, I understand what they're talking about there.
Brings up another question. Do higher prices actually change people's minds about going to Disney? Well, according to that same survey, yes. When it came to people who had never visited a Disney park, over half, 60% of respondents said cost was the number one factor.
Most of the spending at Disney World is done by middle and upper middle class families.
Yep.
Clearly, a lot of Americans are willing to take on a little bit of debt for this sort of trip. We also see that for maybe more Americans, that extra cost, that extra debt that they'd be bringing on is just a bridge too far.
But what about Disney superfans, the diehards, annual pass holders, Disney Vacation Club members? Are higher prices turning them away?
I can tell you, at least before I get into this part, I mean, again, we've had a Disney podcast for 7 years. We've had a Universal one for 5 or 6 years now. you've seen people that have went for a long time, and sometimes people just hit a point that say like, I'm not doing anymore. It's not worth it. Like now I don't know what they're going to say here, but that does happen. And that is something that has been happening to people that historically have gone to the Disney parks for even decades. And you can even see on this channel, a lot of the comments of people talking about it. So the pricing does make people just get turned off by Disney on top of, probably other factors as well.
I'm a long-term Disney pass holder and a traveler of probably 50 or 60 trips in the last 25 years or so. So when I first was able to go as a young adult, I was just blown away, and it really started a love of, allocating a few of my vacations a year would be to go to Disney.
This is Brian Brennan. Brennan was a Disney pass holder for almost 20 years, a Disney World devotee that would take several trips to Orlando every year.
The math would work out to where it's a better option for me to be a pass holder. Get some discounts on dining, I get free parking. So the perks times the number of days going, made it financially viable.
That isn't.
There was always math involved. If you went a certain amount of times per year, it actually saved you money to get a pass with the, the perks, and like it actually, instead of getting the day tickets and things like that. That's what he's talking about there if you're not familiar. But yeah, he's not wrong.
Till this past year, when he decided not to renew his annual pass.
Then they took the fast passes away. Then they took the extra magic hours away. And then suddenly you wake
Extra magic hours were something that were so cool. When I first started going to the parks with my wife around 2015, maybe a little bit before that, I'm trying to remember exactly. I think it was around that time. The parks used to be open until 2 a.m. sometimes, if not even later. Sometimes every once in a while they do like open 24 hours, and like you could be late at night in the park. It had a different vibe and feel. And it was a cool experience. It really was. And now, now if you want to do that, it's the after hours event. You got to pay extra for that. So again, it's another example of things that used to be included. It was usually a perk for staying on property, but now it's, a paid event.
Wake up one day and you go, the 10% refund that I'm getting on discount at restaurants isn't necessarily adding up to the value when all those other things have gone away.
There is
Especially when the cost of the food has also gone up with it.
Sunk cost fallacy with Disney, where people have put so much time, so much of their identity is associated with Disney and the parks. It's hard to admit when the company is diluting what you love.
And after canceling,
that's a hard bridge to cross for a lot of people. And you not only see this with Disney, with other things where, it's really hard for people to see these things, again, rose-colored glasses, whatever you want to call it. And then sometimes it'll just be like the straw that broke the camel's back, and it's just one thing. A lot of people, and especially from listening, from people on our podcast, it's been the DAS system, where that change has caused a lot of people to be like, I'm done. Like, sometimes it's a bigger thing, but sometimes, it's these small things that it's one bridge too far, and then they're done with it. But it can be really difficult for people to even criticize Disney, because I think a lot of people look at Disney as a friend. They don't look at it as this multi-billion-dollar corporation that is really just out to be ruthlessly capitalistic and make as much money as they can.
his annual pass, Brennan has started using his money to travel elsewhere.
Lately, I've found a lot of value in going on a cruise. I'm going to go on this beautiful ship, and they're going to give me all of my meals and all of my drinks, and they're going to take me to Bermuda. And I couldn't even, get into a Disney moderate resort. Forget the food, forget the tickets, on the same price as that.
If you have enough money to afford to come to the Walt Disney parks every year, you also have a lot of other choices, so you're probably not coming every year.
And that's the problem for Disney. Catering to wealthier travelers means catering to people that often have more options when it comes.
Aha! Absolutely. I've been saying this for years. As you go after this higher demo of people, yes, you can make some money on one trip, but these people have options. And if they don't enjoy their experience, if it's too complicated, if they just don't like the idea, even if they have the money of being nickeled and dimed for everything, these people may just go, oh, let's go on a cruise. Let's go to Europe. Let's go do something else. You're talking about people who have options and are able to do other things. And yeah, I completely agree. I've been saying this for a long time.
Comes to where they travel, meaning Disney parks are now competing with luxury vacation spots, places like Vail or the Bahamas, where a high-end vacation costs just a couple $1,000 more.
If you price it out, you can do a lot of stuff with the price that it costs to go to Disney.
When going to a domestic theme park is costing more than, say, like, hey, we could spend a week in Paris. It really is going to start making that choice more difficult.
I think what we're seeing is consumers have a lot of choices, and they're making thoughtful decisions as to where they want to go, which means it's a competitive environment, which means that we need to be smart and thoughtful about making sure we're listening to what their needs are and how do we appeal to their needs. The idea here is to make this wonderful, beloved resort, or really any of our parks around the world, accessible to as many people as we possibly can.
There are areas where Disney parks have started to make changes.
Every decision they make at this corporation is what would Walt do? And so when Bob Iger answers that question, Walt would not do that. He changes something.
Here, this happens with all these things. Is they'll go after Disney and they're bringing up really valid points in this video, and then it's seemingly every single time they do a full circle, and somehow it's not Bob Iger's fault, even though he's been the CEO for 20 some years. Like, he never really left when Chapek was around. I think Bob Iger asked what would Walt do with every decision? No. Like, clearly, if you've studied Walt, which one of the things I've liked about the Disney parks over the years is the story of Walt, and his success and his values and the things he would talk about. I don't think you would see Walt charging for fast passes. I don't think you see Walt price gouging. And yeah, you can get into market dynamics and what that would look like, but to have the idea that anybody in terms of Disney leadership today is thinking along the same lines as Walt, as the innovator that he was, I think is rather laughable. So I'm assuming here from what she just said, they're about to go into the fact that Bob Iger is on the mission, on the case, and he's going to fix the problem.
Since returning to the helm of Disney in 2022,
he never left.
CEO Bob Iger has already made steps to reverse some COVID-era changes that weren't the most popular with guests. Things like bringing back free parking for resort guests. And
okay, I'll give them that. Them bringing back free parking for the resorts, rather surprised by. So I did like that one. I will give them that.
Retooling Genie Plus into Lightning Lanes, with the new app offering additional perks to guests staying on Disney property.
The notion that we give more privileges to people who stay in our resort and stay 7 days than we do people who don't stay in our resorts or only stay 2 days. Like, that's really smart because it keeps money in the Disney ecosystem. And at the end of the day, they're trying to create Disney super fans.
Disney is playing an extremely long game, a generational long game, with the end goal of making lifelong Disney fans.
Are they? I think they used to. I think they used to play the long game. I think they're very short-sighted focused now. And I think a lot of it kind of tends to happen when you have, publicly traded companies. Everything is about showing more profit for that next quarter. If they were thinking the long game, in my opinion, I don't think you would do Genie Plus pricing, charging for essentially fast passes and a lot of the price gouging that they've been doing. I think these are very short-sighted things to make the most money you can in a short amount of time. I've said for a while, in terms of even them reacting to Universal Studios like Epic Universe, they just now, this past August, announced things that we're bringing to the parks as essentially the answer for Epic Universe. But again, it's very reactionary, and I don't think it's necessarily long-term thinking as much as, we need to react to this in the short term. At least, again, my opinion.
And if families are priced out, that means less trips, less magic, and less lifetime superfans. Disney already announced it is raising ticket prices again by $5 to $10 for some tickets in 2025.
If you have 7 days with your kid in a Disney park, the odds are you might be a super fan, but more likely your kids are going to be super fans forever. And that's what they're going for.
And that's one group Disney parks are actively working not to price out. Kids.
We have a $50 kids ticket. Children under
no, we'll just price out their parents.
9 can come to this park for $50. We have our lowest entry point ticket is $104.
So even on the chart they're showing, and again, they're not wrong at the lowest entry price ticket is $104. But if you look right here, September 2024, the $104 is 3 days out of that whole month. Everything else is in the $150, $160, $180 range. So while yes, they do technically offer a $104 ticket, at least in September, it's for 3 days out of the entire month. So you may find instances of this where it's there, but again, it's a lot of it to me is the marketing side, but they can go out and say that they have a lower price ticket and things like that.
And by the way, hasn't changed in 5 years.
The reality is
The ceiling has gotten higher on how much they charge.
Disney parks are still the most visited theme parks in the world, with 142 million visitors across all its parks in 2023. That leads us to the big question: does it matter? Disney is still the top global theme park operator in the world. So are rising prices enough to make a serious dent in their visitation?
One of the things that we're getting time and time again is our guest satisfaction is terrific. Our intent to return, our intent to visit. People want to come here because of the totality of what we offer and the value that we deliver.
Part of that is that there's not a breaking point, that people will continue to pay the parenthood tax that is Disney.
If people don't vote with their wallet and aren't vocal about these changes across the industry, not just Disney, across the whole travel industry, then nothing's ever going to change.
So at the end there, in terms of does it matter, I think this is why competition is good. And someone pushing Disney like Universal is pushing Disney. And again, Universal is not this half price destination, but they offer a different set of perks and things that they bring in. And you're talking about kids, they're talking about making lifelong fans for kids. A lot of this bleeds into the fact of like, on the movie side and the Disney Plus side, Disney hasn't had a lot of things. Now, they did have this past summer Inside Out 2 and things like that. But, in terms of IPs and things that the kids are really into, they're not as into Disney as they used to be. And the Disney parks are basically just IP machines now, as every new attraction is going to be an IP. A lot more kids are watching things on YouTube. Obviously, you talk about Universal Studios bringing in Nintendo. Nintendo is almost a built-in what Disney wants and has had is a generational thing that people, share with their kids and they want to go experience it in the parks. Universal, essentially, they got the licensing rights for Nintendo, put them in the parks, and it's an instantaneous generational thing. I grew up playing Nintendo. My daughter and I now play Nintendo together. Our kids play. So that's something that we both want to experience. So, Universal is in many ways, they're still building their generational, equivalent, I guess you could say, for Disney, but in many ways they're sort of shortcutting and importing what the IPs they're bringing in. I do think Nintendo is a really big one, which they're going to do more and more in their parks. So in terms of the pricing here, will people continue to pay it? I think we're already seeing investors get a little shaky on this because their Disney stock was downgraded last week, citing the weakness in the parks and the increased competition. And I don't think people will pay these things in perpetuity forever if they don't see the value. It's easy to sit back and say, look how much money we made. People are still coming. But I've said all along, once you start seeing that decrease, what does Disney do to turn that around, especially with the economy? Now, if the economy completely turns around and things change, people obviously may just be like, yeah, let's go to Disney. But with competition, Epic Universe, Universal Studios, doing all the things they do, I think these are ultimately good things that will force Disney to be more, I guess you could say, sensitive to the guest demands. Because for the longest time, Disney could just do what they wanted to do. Universal really wasn't a big competition. But the past 10 years, especially ever since Comcast bought Universal, they've been making a lot of improvements in their parks and been building their sort of, I guess you could say, legacy or how they go about their traditions, how they do things in their parks. And they have a lot of momentum. They've got a lot of anticipation. People are hyped up for Epic Universe and what they're going to continue to do. So I think competition does force Disney, if they're not going to be, sensitive on the pricing of things, which I think they will be, but I think in terms of what guests want, and if people are really liking what Universal is doing, it's going to be really hinging on these new things that Disney announced of like, do the guests react to this? Do they like it? But I think when you're talking about the Disney parks, I'm not making the argument that the Disney parks are empty. Anybody saying they are empty, it's not the case. There are slow times, but the attendance has not recovered since 2019. I mean, you can look at any of the attendance reports. 2019 was the peak. They haven't recovered that. Essentially, what Disney has been doing, though, is charging more money per guest that come through those gates to make up the difference there. So I think the question that comes into Disney, like, is that sustainable? I think one way to look at that is like, had the guy that used to be an annual pass holder. A lot of people that we've talked to, and again, a lot of people on this channel and other channels that I've talked about in the comments sections, a lot of people have been lifelong Disney fans that say like, I'm done, I'm not doing this anymore. Like, and there's something different maybe for each person that is the straw that broke that camel's back and say, I'm done with this, I'm not doing it anymore. Maybe it was DAS, maybe it was the food costs, or whatever it is. How many new people are Disney bringing in to replace those people that they lose, I think is a really good question. I don't have the answer to that, but I have an idea. And the thinking is, at least in terms of the momentum and the, anticipation, really where like people are really excited for. I think a lot of it, I'm not saying all of it, but a lot of it is moving over toward Universal Studios. So I think that's the question with Disney is like, are they replacing the people that they're losing at the same rate? I have a feeling that they're not, but the next few quarters are going to be very interesting for Disney because, again, the parks make I mean, they even talked about it in here, but I mean, the last year it was 70% of the profit for the entire company came from the parks. When that starts slipping and investors are already talking about this, that's going to be a really big hit to the company, especially they've even said themselves, the next few quarters are going to be, I think they said for the fourth quarter was going to be mid-single digits in terms of loss of revenue or profit or both. I can't remember which one exactly, but, they're seeing a lessening of demand going into 2025 as their their biggest competitor is opening up their brand new, highly anticipated theme park. And on top of that, Disney has announced all these things they're doing to the parks to add in there. So their existing parks are going to be under heavy construction for, the way Disney builds, in my opinion, it'd be 5+ years pretty easily on that end. So the next few years are going to be really interesting for Disney in terms of how does this look with their competitors really ramping up with, the things that have been going on and the trends they have. If I'm Disney management, maybe a bit nervous few couple of years here and really see how things perform. And if they don't, what does Disney do to turn this around? Do they just go back to some of the things they used to do, which I think they probably should? But again, they're talking about Disney thinking the long view. I think maybe they're starting to now. They're starting to get a little worried about things of realizing of, the investors being a little nervous. That's probably what makes them the most nervous. So they want to put investors at ease. But I'm not claiming to have all the answers. All I can tell you is how things trend, things that I personally notice about the parks. And a lot of times I tend to talk about things that, I think may happen down the road. And I kind of look at Disney as being very short-sighted and losing a lot of the, I guess you could just say, the values that they used to hold as a company in terms of how they, how they made the guest feel, the little things they used to do to make each experience try and be as, quote, magical as possible. I kind of feel like that's transformed a bit more into just trying to make everybody come through the gate, spend as much money as possible. But either way, that is going to be it, though, for this video. If you like this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel as we do lots of coverage here of Disney World, Universal Studios, Epic Universe, and pop culture. And let us know in the comments what you think about this video. I'm very curious to see what you guys have to say and your insights on this. And until next time, we will see you in the parks.